Welcome to Revenge Report. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Let's dive in. I wasn't expecting to get an invitation. In fact, when the message from Mason popped up on my phone, I almost laughed. Mason, my younger brother, had always been more of a loose cannon than a guy who thought to invite me anywhere. The message was simple. Hey Talia, come check out my martial arts class this Saturday. I'll introduce you to the guys. I read it a few times, wondering what he was playing at. But then again, Mason was always unpredictable. A little part of me felt something was off, but I figured, why not? It might give me a chance to see the side of him I didn't always get to. After all, I'd missed a lot growing up. So I typed a quick reply. Sure, I'll be there. The dojo was busy when I walked in. The sharp scent of rubber mats and sweat hit me before I even got through the door. Students were spread out across the room, some stretching, others practicing their forms. The atmosphere was thick with focus, but it wasn't what made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. That came when I saw Mason at the front of the room. He was leading the class, showing off his black belt with that smug grin that had always irked me. He introduced me to his friends, all of them nodding and exchanging pleasantries, but I could tell they were sizing me up. I was just Talia, his older sister. That's what it felt like they were thinking. Like I didn't belong in a place like this. Mason didn't waste any time. As soon as we finished with the introductions, he turned to me, his grin sharpening. So Talia, I know you've done a bit of everything, huh? He raised an eyebrow. Military, languages, all that. But I gotta ask, do you know how to handle yourself? Because it's all well and good to speak 5 languages, but can you throw a punch? It was the kind of comment he'd been throwing at me since we were kids. The kind that made you question if it was a joke or something more. And this time, it wasn't different. It was just another way for him to assert his control, to make me feel small, like I was out of place. I could feel the tension in his words, like there was something deeper behind the taunt. And I wasn't wrong. His eyes held something sharp, something unresolved. There was a rift between us, a fracture that neither of us had really acknowledged. But it was there. I didn't bite. I remained calm, just like I always had when he tried to provoke me. I'll just watch, I said, keeping my tone steady. I wasn't here to fight with him. I was here to see him in his element, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing beneath the surface. Mason just shrugged. Suit yourself, he muttered, turning away to start the class. But I saw the way his jaw clenched. I wasn't sure what was coming next, but I had a sinking feeling that whatever it was, it wouldn't end quietly. The dojo hummed with energy as Mason strutted around, showing off his moves in front of his friends. His confidence was unmistakable. He was in his element, clearly proud of his black belt. I stood off to the side, keeping my distance, but I couldn't help but notice how his bravado rippled through the group. His friends looked on with admiration, the kind of admiration that only fueled Mason's ego. So guys, Mason said, glancing at me with that same smug grin he'd worn earlier. This is my sister, Talia. She's done some military stuff, speaks a bunch of languages, and thinks she's some kind of tough person. But you know what? I don't know if she's ever really tested herself. His words rang in the air, and for a moment, I could see the other students exchange glances. Some looked intrigued, others amused. But Mason was trying to provoke me. He wanted to see if I would rise to his bait. You've probably never thrown a punch in your life, have you? Mason's tone was more mocking now, the challenge in his voice unmistakable. I mean, speaking 5 languages is great and all, but can you handle yourself if things got physical? His words were thick with sarcasm, and I knew, deep down, I had to stay composed. Mason wasn't just testing me, he was testing something else. His challenge was not about martial arts, it was about proving his own superiority. The kind of superiority that had always lingered between us, unspoken but understood. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I tilted my head slightly, eyes locking with his. Is that really what you want? I asked quietly. My voice was calm, almost too calm, as if I'd already decided the course of action. Mason's grin stretched wider, his eyes gleaming. Yeah, why not? Let's see what you've got, Talia. Show us how tough you really are. Before I could reply, one of Mason's friends, a lanky guy with a black belt in karate, stepped forward. He was eager, confident, and clearly itching for some action. I can show her how it's done, he said with a laugh. Watch this. I didn't move, didn't flinch, just watched as the karate black belt squared off in front of me. His stance was wide, his hands up, ready to attack. And I felt the tiniest flicker of amusement tug at the corner of my lips. I didn't need to prove anything. But if he wanted to test me, I would show him exactly what it meant to underestimate me. Without a word, the karate black belt lunged, coming at me with a quick, calculated strike aimed at my midsection. He probably thought he'd take me down with ease, but what he didn't know was that this wasn't a game to me. It was a study of control, of balance. As his fist came toward me, I stepped aside, moving with a fluid grace that made it look effortless. I redirected his momentum, guiding him with a simple movement, using his own force against him. The next thing he knew, he was sprawled on the floor, landing with a soft thud. The room went silent. There were no gasps, no applause, just stunned silence. Mason's friends froze, their eyes wide, staring at the scene in disbelief. Even Mason, who had been so sure of himself, faltered for a moment, his grin slipping just a fraction. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. I simply turned my attention back to Mason, who was watching with a mixture of surprise and, if I had to guess, a twinge of embarrassment. His friend slowly got to his feet, brushing himself off, but the energy in the room had shifted. There was no mockery in the air now, just a heavy silence that seemed to say everything. "Guess you were right," Mason muttered, his voice quieter now, as if the wind had been knocked out of his sails. "Maybe you do know how to handle yourself." I met his gaze, my expression still calm. "It's not about handling myself," I said quietly. "It's about knowing when not to make a move." Mason didn't respond, and the dojo seemed to hold its breath. Whatever had been brewing between us, whatever unspoken tension had lingered for so long, seemed to hang in the air, thick and unresolved. It wasn't just about martial arts anymore, it was about something much deeper. The silence in the dojo was deafening, but it didn't bother me. It never had. Silence had always been my ally, even back in the field, where it was the difference between life and death. The steady rhythm of Mason's friends whispering among themselves, the tension thick in the air, it didn't affect me. I was used to the stillness. I closed my eyes briefly and let the memory wash over me. It was a humid afternoon, the kind that clung to your skin and made every breath feel like a struggle. I was crouched in the shadows of an industrial alley somewhere in Asia, trying to keep my breathing steady. The soft scrape of my boots against the gravel was the only sound in the otherwise quiet alley. I was in the middle of a tense negotiation. A gang leader, angry and unpredictable, had made it clear that he wasn't in the mood for anything other than violence. His men, rough and menacing, stood around us, their eyes scanning for weakness. But I wasn't looking for weakness. I was looking for control. Control of the conversation, control of the situation, control of the moment. And I had it, thanks to Mandarin and thanks to years of training. As the gang leader shouted his demands, I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't let my anger show. Instead, I spoke in soft, deliberate Mandarin, every word calculated to hit the right mark. It wasn't just about what I said, it was how I said it. Calm, measured, silent strength. His eyes narrowed at me, trying to gauge whether I was bluffing, but my posture was steady. The men around us shifted nervously, but I didn't give an inch. In the end, it was the silence that broke him. His men weren't used to someone who didn't respond to threats with more threats. They weren't used to someone who didn't need to yell to make their point. And when the deal was struck, when the tension finally broke, I walked away with everyone's lives intact. No shots fired, no bloodshed, just control. I opened my eyes again, the memory still lingering in my mind. That was the real power I'd learned over the years, control. And it was a power that worked just as well here, in the dojo, as it had in that alley. Mason was still standing there, his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on me, waiting for me to react. He thought I was still the same little sister he could push around, but I wasn't. And I wasn't going to let this moment, this childish provocation, get the best of me. I'd trained for worse, much worse. The room was still, and I could feel Mason's eyes on me, the challenge hanging in the air like a weight. His earlier bravado had faded, replaced by something more dangerous, resentment. He was testing me, pushing me, trying to get me to lose control, to lose my calm. But I wouldn't. I didn't need to. I looked at him for a moment, then shifted my attention to his friends, still watching me with wide eyes, their admiration shifting into something else now, uncertainty, maybe even fear. I wasn't here to make a spectacle, but I knew that whatever had been between Mason and me, whatever tension had been brewing for years, had just escalated. The stakes were higher now, and I could feel it. I could feel it in my bones. This was no longer just a test of strength. This was a test of control. And I had all the control I needed. The silence stretched on, and I stood my ground, knowing that this moment, this stillness, was exactly what I needed. To be seen, to be heard without saying a word. I wasn't just here to watch. I was here to show them that silence, control, and strength were the greatest weapons of all. Mason's friend stumbled to his feet, his pride bruised more than his body. The dojo was as silent as a tomb, the shock of the moment hanging in the air like smoke after a fire. The young karate black belt, who had seemed so sure of himself only moments before, wiped the dust from his gi, his gaze flickering nervously between me and Mason. He looked like he might want to try again, but the hesitation in his step said it all. He knew better than to test me further. Mason's confident smile faltered, his gaze now shifting from his friend to me, as if he were still trying to process what had just happened. The swagger that had been so prominent when he'd introduced me to his friends had crumbled, and his voice was tinged with something more uncomfortable than mockery. "Nice move," he muttered, but there was no bite in his words now, just a thin veil of disbelief. I didn't acknowledge his comment, keeping my stance loose and relaxed, but not yet dropping my guard. The silence in the dojo was deafening. No one moved, no one spoke. The energy had shifted. The tension that had once felt so thick now hummed with an unfamiliar sense of unease. Mason's previously assured bravado seemed to have evaporated, leaving a void that no one knew how to fill. It wasn't over. I could feel it. The room had waited for Mason to be the alpha, to prove himself in front of his friends, to humiliate me, but I had interrupted that narrative with a single graceful move, one that spoke volumes without a single word. Before Mason could recover, another figure stepped forward. A second black belt, clearly wanting to regain some control of the situation, eyed me with a mix of curiosity and challenge. "All right," he said, his tone firm but measured. "Let's see what you've got." I wasn't here to prove anything, but he needed this to prove something to himself. He raised his fists, his posture stiff and prepared, and then advanced toward me, his movement swift but calculated. The moment he attacked, I didn't hesitate. I moved with him, not against him, redirecting his force just as easily as I had done with his friend. It was effortless, fluid, like a dancer guiding a partner through a routine. With a single motion, I spun, using his own momentum to push him down to the ground. He hit the mat with a thud that echoed across the room, a reminder of how little force it took to ground someone when you understood their body and movements. The dojo was silent once more, but this time, the silence carried weight. Mason's expression twisted, a mix of disbelief and something darker. His friends, who had once looked at him with admiration, now looked at me with a new understanding. The air seemed thick with the uncomfortable realization that they had misjudged me. They had expected a show, something that would entertain them, but they hadn't anticipated this. They hadn't anticipated my control, my calmness. Mason's smugness, once so easily maintained, was shattered. For the first time in this dojo, he didn't know how to respond. He had challenged me, thinking I was an easy target, but now he was faced with something more than he could handle. His usual swagger had vanished, replaced by uncertainty. I stood there, calm and composed, not even breaking a sweat. "This isn't about fighting, Mason," I said quietly, my voice carrying across the room, cutting through the tension like a knife. "It's about control and knowing when not to fight." Mason didn't respond right away. He just stared at me, his thoughts clearly racing. But I knew something had shifted. The room wasn't just watching a physical confrontation anymore. They were watching a shift in power, a subtle shift that left Mason vulnerable. The dojo remained still, the silence now filled with unspoken questions. The challenge had ended, but the real test, the deeper one, had just begun. The silence in the dojo seemed to stretch even longer now, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for something, anything, to break the tension. Mason's friend had finally gotten to his feet, his pride the only thing still bruised. But Mason wasn't done yet. His face had lost that confident edge, and the energy in the room had shifted completely. There was no laughter, no more jabs, just the quiet hum of uncomfortable realization. I noticed Mason's phone slip from his pocket as he turned to look at me, the screen facing up. For a split second, the light from the screen caught my attention. Curiosity tugged at me, but I didn't act immediately. It was in that fraction of a moment, with Mason distracted, that I caught the message. The words burned into my mind. "Get her on camera. Make her look weak. Show everyone who's really in charge." I didn't need to look further. I didn't need to read more to understand the betrayal. It was coming from the one place I had never expected. Our father, always the manipulator, always pulling strings, had just used Mason as his pawn. The plan was clear. Humiliate me. I remained still, as if I hadn't seen anything. I didn't let my emotions show. There was nothing that Mason could do now that would make me lose my control. I had long learned that when emotions cloud your judgment, you're no longer in control. And I wouldn't let this moment, the moment I knew was meant to break me, be anything other than another lesson. Mason, oblivious to the fact that I had seen the text, tried to salvage whatever remained of his pride. He looked at me, that familiar smirk creeping back on his face. What, Talia? You scared to finish the lesson? You think you've proven enough? I glanced down at his phone, then back at him. My voice was calm, almost cold as I spoke. I didn't know our family played games like this, Mason. Did you really think I wouldn't see that? Mason froze. His eyes widened, the blood draining from his face as he realized that I had seen the message. The casual dismissal in my tone was deliberate. No anger, no accusation, just recognition. The dojo fell into another uncomfortable silence. The tension that had been built by Mason's taunting and his friend's failed attempt to show superiority now hung over everyone. Mason's expression shifted, a mix of anger and embarrassment twisting his features. He didn't say anything for a long time, but I could feel the walls closing in on him. Mason, I continued, still in that same calm, even tone, it's not about strength or skill. It's about control, and you've lost that. You've lost it in front of everyone here. You've made this about you, but now you're about to make it about me. His jaw clenched. His friends glanced at each other, unsure of how to respond. The air was thick with their uncertainty, and I knew this wasn't just about proving a point anymore. This was something bigger, something Mason had never expected. He finally broke the silence. It wasn't supposed to be like this, Talia, he muttered, his voice tight with frustration. I shook my head. No, Mason, you made it exactly like this. I let the words settle in, my gaze unwavering. You think you can humiliate me? You think it's just a game? For the first time in that dojo, Mason didn't have a response. The realization hit him in waves, the weight of what he had tried to do, and the undeniable fact that it had backfired. He looked to his friends, but they avoided his gaze, feeling the uncomfortable shift in the energy around us. I stepped forward, just a small movement, but it made the whole room take notice. The power in my calmness was undeniable, and Mason could no longer pretend he held control. The floor beneath him had shifted, and he had nowhere left to stand. You've always been good at pretending, Mason. But the truth is, I said quietly, you can't buy respect, and you can't manipulate me into being something I'm not. The words hung in the air, and Mason swallowed hard. He seemed to shrink in the face of them, and for the first time, I saw him as just another person, not the brother I'd grown up with, but a man desperate to hide his flaws behind bravado and games. I knew the moment had passed. The lesson had been delivered, and in the silence that followed, I watched Mason, his posture slumped, the energy drained from him, finally begin to realize that there was more to this than just a fight. There was more to control than throwing punches. And as I turned away from him, the last words I spoke were not for him, but for myself. I'm not here to play your game, Mason. I never was. It didn't take long for the video to spread. A few hours after the confrontation in the dojo, a clip of my exchange with Mason and his friends was already circulating. The world, it seemed, was more interested in the calmness with which I had taken on their challenge than the chaos it had started. I sat in my apartment, my phone buzzing nonstop. Notifications poured in, each one another reminder that this moment had transcended the dojo. My thoughts were steady as I scrolled through the messages, some supportive, others questioning Mason's behavior. But one thing was certain, the video was a turning point. The footage, taken by one of Mason's friends, captured the moment I'd thrown his friend effortlessly to the ground. But more than that, it captured the silent power I had wielded. I hadn't needed to raise my voice or make a dramatic move. It was all in the stillness. The world had recognized that power. The control I exuded had become the focal point. I saw a message from a friend I hadn't spoken to in years. Talia, you were amazing. It's rare to see someone handle a situation with that kind of grace. Mason's a jerk, and it's clear you were just trying to show him his place. Much respect. Then, a post from someone I didn't know, shared with hundreds of others. A woman who's not just about fighting, but about dignity and control. This is the kind of role model we need, dark respect. But it wasn't just admiration. There were comments criticizing Mason, questioning his motives, and pointing out how his actions reflected poorly on him. The overwhelming support for me wasn't just because of my skill, it was because of how I handled myself. Some of Mason's friends had started to turn on him. The comment sections were flooded with people reminding him that humiliation wasn't a sign of strength, it was a sign of insecurity. And that's when the guilt started to creep in. Did I go too far? I shook my head, silencing the thought. Number, I hadn't done anything wrong. I hadn't provoked him. I'd simply responded to his challenge. But the fact that Mason's humiliation was becoming a public spectacle that I had not expected. Mason had tried to prove a point to me, but instead, I had proven a far deeper one. The video had gone viral, and my quiet response had resonated with people in ways I hadn't anticipated. It was a lesson in control, in maintaining your ground, even when others try to drag you into their chaos. Mason's behavior had made him the villain in this story, but I had remained calm, unshaken. In the end, that was my real victory. And as the comments flooded in, praise, criticism, support, and ridicule, I knew this moment wasn't about revenge anymore. It had become something more. It had become a lesson in dignity, control, and silence. The viral video was no longer just about Mason and me. It was about how one quiet person could command a room, no, a world, without raising a fist. I didn't need to react to any of it. The stillness I had embraced in the dojo had followed me into this new space, and I was content to watch the ripple effect unfold, knowing that my message had been received loud and clear. The power of silence had become my statement, and it had found its way into the hearts of those who watched. I put my phone down for a moment, taking a deep breath, a moment of peace. I had not only proven something to Mason, but I had also shown the world that power didn't need to shout to be heard. It didn't need to boast to be respected, and somewhere in the back of my mind, I realized that Mason had made a huge mistake. Not just in trying to humiliate me, but in thinking I was someone who could be humiliated. The dojo had been my proving ground. Now the world was watching, and it was clear. My power, my control, was my greatest weapon. A week had passed since the events at the dojo, but the weight of it still hung in the air, like the last echoes of a thunderstorm that hadn't quite finished. I'd returned to my routine, keeping my focus steady, but my thoughts sometimes drifted to what had happened, what he had done. Mason had crossed a line, and I wasn't sure if he even realized the depth of what he had attempted. I wasn't sure when it would come, but I knew it was coming. The apology, the regret, something. I'd felt it in the air, thick with expectation. And sure enough, the knock came at my door. I opened it slowly, my mind still not fully prepared for what was about to unfold. Standing in front of me was Mason, his hands shoved awkwardly into his pockets. His shoulders hunched in a way that made him look smaller, less sure of himself than I'd ever seen. I wanted to talk, he said, his voice tentative, as if he wasn't sure what kind of reception he'd get. I nodded, stepping back to let him in. There was no rush, no hurry. If he wanted to speak, he would. I wouldn't force him to. I simply gestured to the couch and sat across from him, waiting in that quiet stillness I was so accustomed to. For a few long seconds, Mason just stared at the floor, his thoughts clearly in turmoil. When he finally looked up, there was an unfamiliar softness in his eyes. The cocky bravado that had once been his shield was gone, replaced by something real, something raw. I messed up, Talia, he started, his voice low, like the words were a struggle for him. I didn't realize what I was doing, not until it was too late. I didn't interrupt him. I didn't rush him. I just waited, letting him find his own way through the apology. I was trying to show off, make myself look good, but I ended up trying to make you look bad, and I'm sorry for that. I should have never done that to you. The words were clumsy, like he was testing them out to see if they fit. But there was no sarcasm, no underlying anger, just sincerity. I studied him quietly, watching how he shifted in his seat, his hands rubbing against his jeans. He seemed genuinely uncomfortable, like he was exposed in a way he wasn't used to. This wasn't the Mason I'd known for years, the one who hid behind his ego. This was something different. Why did you do it? I asked, my voice soft but firm. He swallowed hard, his gaze shifting away. I guess I've always felt like I had something to prove. To you, to everyone. I don't know why I've always felt like that. But when you came into the dojo, I thought it was my chance to show you who I was. I didn't think I was good enough. Not like you are. My heart clenched at the admission. There it was. The truth that had always been lurking beneath the surface. The truth I hadn't known how to see. Mason had been fighting not just for approval, but for something deeper, something personal. I wanted you to see me as strong, as worthy, he continued, but I didn't know how to do that without tearing you down first. I thought if I could embarrass you, I'd feel better about myself. But it only made me look pathetic, and it backfired. You didn't just fight back. You showed me what real strength is. There was a long pause, the kind that felt too heavy with unsaid things. I hadn't spoken yet, just watching him. I wasn't sure what to say, if anything. But after a while, I finally broke the silence. I didn't need you to prove anything to me, Mason. You've always been good enough. I never thought you needed to show me anything. Mason looked up then, his eyes soft with something close to regret. And for the first time in a long time, he seemed to fully understand the weight of what he'd done, not just to me, but to himself. I never wanted you to feel like you weren't good enough either, I added quietly. But that's what you've been doing, Mason, all this time, trying to prove something to people who didn't need proving to. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he just nodded slowly, letting the weight of my words settle. I was wrong, he said finally. His voice was quieter now, more introspective. I thought you'd be a target to prove myself against. But you're not. You're the example. The one I need to look up to, not tear down. The admission was raw, vulnerable, something that had been buried deep inside him for far too long. And in that moment, I realized that this wasn't just an apology. It was a turning point for Mason, one that he didn't even know he needed until now. I want to learn, Talia, he said. I want to learn from you, not just martial arts, but how to be someone who doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. How to be you. I felt a flicker of warmth, something I hadn't expected. I hadn't expected him to want to change, but here he was, admitting it. And that, in itself, was a step toward redemption. You'll need discipline for that, I said, my voice steady and clear. It's not just about fighting, it's about understanding yourself. He nodded, a small, humble gesture. I'm ready to learn. Not just from you, but from the lessons I've missed all these years. I studied him for a moment, considering the weight of his words. The air between us was different now, softer, less tense. I'll help you, I said simply, but it won't be easy. This isn't about quick fixes, it's about real change. He met my gaze then, and for the first time in a long while, he seemed truly determined. I'm ready, he replied, his voice strong with a sincerity I hadn't expected. I nodded, finally feeling the weight of the situation lift. This wasn't just an apology, it was the beginning of something new, something that had been buried for far too long, waiting for the right moment to surface. And in this moment, I knew that Mason was ready to face himself, and that was the hardest part of all. A week had passed since Mason's apology, and though things had shifted between us, the real work was just beginning. Mason had shown up at my apartment, humbled, eager to learn, but I knew this wasn't going to be a quick fix. His ego, built up over years of pretending to be something he wasn't, needed to be broken down. And that wasn't going to happen overnight. It started in the most unexpected place. My living room, a quiet space now set up for something far different than what either of us had envisioned when the day began. I watched Mason standing at the center of the room, his posture stiff and unsure. He had changed, yes, but I could see that he still struggled with the most basic concept of martial arts, discipline. His movements were sharp, mechanical, lacking the flow and grace that martial arts demanded. He was focused on the wrong things, the wrong fight. Let's start with the basics, I said, my voice calm, the same stillness I'd carried since the dojo settling into my chest. Mason nodded, swallowing the lump of frustration he always seemed to carry with him. I had decided to teach him Wing Chun. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't showy, but it was about control, precision, balance. Every movement had a purpose. Every strike had meaning. The practice wasn't about beating someone else, it was about mastering yourself. You'll have to learn to breathe first, I began. Without breath, there is no control. Without control, there is no strength. Mason was quiet as he nodded again. His eyes flickered between determination and doubt, the latter still clouding the clarity I hoped he would find through this process. He followed my instructions, mimicking the slow, deliberate movements I demonstrated. I wasn't teaching him how to fight, I was teaching him how to be. Breathe deeply, I instructed. Feel the flow of your body with every movement. Let the stillness guide you. I watched him, his struggles becoming more evident with every failed attempt. His arms jerked at the wrong moment, his body too rigid, his focus erratic. It was frustrating for him, I could see that. But the lesson wasn't in the perfect execution of every move. It was about letting go, about releasing the need to prove himself. You're thinking too much, Mason, I said calmly. This isn't about proving something to me. It's about learning how to control yourself, your breath, your body, your mind. His shoulders tensed at my words, but I could see him starting to absorb them. He was listening, really listening, for the first time. Over the next hour, we worked through the basics, simple movements, precise stances. Over and over, Mason stumbled, and over I guided him back to the basics. My patience never wavered. I had learned long ago that growth didn't happen in a rush. It was slow, steady, like breathing. By the end of the session, Mason was sweating, his movements a bit more fluid. He hadn't mastered everything, he wasn't supposed to, but there was a shift. His face was softer, his movements more in sync with his breath, and I saw something behind his eyes I hadn't seen in years: awareness. He was beginning to understand. I stopped him after one last sequence, letting the silence hang in the air. Look at how far you've come already, I said. It's not about how much you can do, it's about knowing why you do it. Mason looked at me, his chest rising and falling with each breath. He didn't speak at first, just standing there, processing the weight of everything that had happened in such a short time. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet but steady. I thought fighting was about winning, but it's not. It's about understanding, control. I nodded. Exactly. When you control yourself, the world around you becomes easier to navigate. The fight becomes secondary. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. I get it now. It's not about the moves. It's about mastering yourself, isn't it? Exactly, I said, my voice warm with approval. The greatest strength comes from within. When you learn to quiet your mind, to control your body and your thoughts, nothing can shake you. That's the real power. Mason stood a little taller, his posture straighter, like he was starting to embody the lesson instead of just hearing it. And for the first time, I saw not just my brother, but a man beginning to find his footing in a world that had always seemed too large for him. We stood there, the stillness between us no longer uncomfortable, but comfortable, unspoken understanding hanging in the air. He had taken the first step toward redemption, and maybe, just maybe, he was starting to learn what real strength was. For the first time in years, I felt that old familiar bond between us slowly begin to heal, not with words, not with grand gestures, but through this quiet practice, this shared lesson. It was enough, and I knew it would be enough for him too. The quiet strength between us spoke louder than any words could have. It was a quiet evening when the text came in. I had just finished tidying up my apartment, the calm after a week of changes, of reflection. I'd been spending more time focusing on myself, on the progress I'd made, and less on the noise around me. The world had shifted, both online and offline, and I felt a certain peace settling in. Then my phone buzzed. The message was short, the words simple. I'm watching, proud in silence. I stared at the screen for a long moment, reading those few words again and again, letting them sink in. My father, someone who had been a constant, unpredictable force in my life, had sent me a message that spoke volumes without saying much at all. It wasn't an apology, it wasn't a declaration, it wasn't a confrontation. It was something quieter, something more profound. An acknowledgement, perhaps. Something I had been waiting for, without even realizing it. He was watching in his own way, and he was acknowledging the strength I had shown. But it was in his own, silent way. No fanfare, no confrontation, just the recognition that spoke louder than any words could have. I exhaled slowly, letting the weight of it wash over me. This was the kind of justice I had always wanted, one that didn't demand loud declarations or grand gestures. It wasn't about forcing someone to say the words I needed to hear. It was about knowing, in that quiet moment, that I had made my point, that I had proven something, not just to Mason, but to everyone, including our father. I sat down on the couch, my phone still in my hand, contemplating everything that had transpired. The viral video, the moments with Mason, the quiet apology that had been offered, and the lessons we had both learned. Mason's journey was only just beginning, but my own had come to a quiet, resolute end. It wasn't just about the confrontation anymore. It was about the silence we both needed to learn. Mason was learning his, and I was finally at peace with the silence I had maintained. The message from my father wasn't about validation. It was about understanding, his pride, his approval. It wasn't something I needed anymore. I had already found it in the quiet strength I had cultivated. As I sat there, the weight of his words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. It was enough. For the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing anyone's approval. Not Mason's, not my father's, not anyone's. I had found my own, and that was where the peace was, in the stillness. I stood up slowly, feeling the quiet power in my chest, in my bones. The journey had brought me here, to this moment. The family betrayal, the confrontation with Mason, the lessons learned, all of it had led to this quiet recognition. My internal strength was unshaken, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly free. I moved toward the window, looking out over the city as the night settled in. The silence felt comfortable now. My journey was far from over, but this chapter had closed with a sense of peace, of strength, found in the quiet. And as I stood there, watching the world drift into the night, I felt a sense of calm that I hadn't known before. No more noise, no more struggle, just the quiet hum of strength that came from within. I had no more battles to fight, only lessons to teach, and only in silence. And with that, I moved forward, unshaken, my strength intact.